Hi everyone, my name is Zach Hendricks. For those who don't know, I am the director of Dune Productions' most recent film, Wild Boys: The Hunt for Sasquatch. I also played one of the characters in there as well. I was asked by Ethan and Jordan to film a short video to just talking about some of the things that I learned making that, since that was my first feature film that I've made thus far. I'm going to organize this into 5 different things or bullet points that I learned. I have my notes right here. And so my first one here is to use what you have available right now. And what I mean by that is use something that you have at your disposal without having to go to like a whole bunch of extensive amounts of work or dumping a whole bunch of money into something just to get a specific result. And just to expand on that, how I initially became associated with Dune Productions was I was a good friend of Ethan's beforehand. I went in to pitch a movie that was actually a Western to Ethan and Jordan before the beginning of summer, because we wanted to shoot it sometime in July. And going through that process, we had a few meetings, and going through that, I realized, or we collectively realized, that if we wanted the vision for that movie to stay true to itself and just get the result that I was looking for, we needed more time to, plan, budget things out, stuff like that, coordinate with people that were going to be involved because it was a bigger project. So we ultimately decided, okay, what can we do right now? Because we wanted to keep the integrity of that project intact. Ethan brought up that he had received a Sasquatch costume from a friend of ours. We were like, okay, what can we do with that? And the ideas started flowing, and we came up with this idea of, okay, we could do a Sasquatch movie. Okay, what does that look like? And then we started brainstorming these ideas, and we ultimately settled on this comedy that we made. But yeah, so like, that's a real life example from the project that I just finished that shows or describes kind of the discernment that we had to use of like, if we were gonna make that Western that I was going to this summer, we were gonna have to cut a lot of corners to make that sort of work. There were a lot of corners that I didn't necessarily want to cut. I wanted to keep the integrity of that project intact, which is one of the great things about independent filmmaking, is that you don't have studios, breathing down your neck trying to manipulate the story how they want it, as opposed to keeping, your story intact. So we went for this Sasquatch movie, which I am very happy with. You don't want to compromise your authorial intent when you come up with a story. And so instead of compromising that one, we decided, okay, we're gonna make a story that we can't compromise, that's easy, that we can shoot quickly. Like within a week, we shot this movie that didn't require a lot of foreplanning. Like, we wrote a scriptment. We didn't write a full-on script, which is why it's completely improvised. We were just like, okay, we need to hit these beats, and then we'll fill in the spaces of how we get from one beat to the next with whatever we end up coming up with on set, which was a lot of fun. But that was one of the things we did just because we wanted to get this movie out this summer, and we did what we could with the amount of time that we had, and I think we did that very resourcefully. That's what I would recommend to you guys who, like myself, may not necessarily have oodles of money or time on your hands when you want to put something out. So maybe what I would recommend is, if you use something that you have available, or for example, we one of our actors, Richard, we used his property for a large portion of this film, which was very cool, because then we didn't have to drive, all the way to Mount Hood to film the movie. And he has this huge wooded area. It's great. If you haven't seen the movie, go check it out. Use what you have available, and you'll be surprised. I certainly was, with, what we can come up with just some of the unique stuff that you have on hand right now, instead of, having to be like, oh, I can't do this movie that I want because I don't have X, Y, or Z. Don't let that inhibit your creative process. Go out and film something. I mean, if you want to film something, go and do it. It's just, you may not be able to make some crazy blockbuster style thing, but sometimes that's a good thing. Our budget for this movie, Wild Boys, was less than $100, and I think, at least from a creative standpoint, sometimes less is more. And I would say embrace what you do have and utilize that to your advantage, and not necessarily wallow, I guess, in the lack of what you may want to have, if that makes sense. To end this point off, don't compromise some crazy vision that you have by saying, okay, I gotta do this at some point. I'm just gonna go out and shoot it even if I don't have what I want. I would recommend waiting until you have those resources to accomplish that vision, because then I think you'll be a lot more satisfied with it, because you won't be cutting as many corners. It'll fit your original vision for it much better. Now for my second point, once you have that idea, make sure to bounce it off the people that you'll be working with. Make sure it works, I guess, because Ethan, Jordan, and we met I think once a week before shooting this film, and we've met since for editing days and stuff like that before the release of the movie ultimately. And that was very helpful, just constantly working with the people that you will be working with through the pre-production stages all the way through the post-production, because they will have a lot of input because they've been with you the whole way. So find good friends, people that are passionate about the same things that you are. Bounce ideas off them. See, okay, does this work, does that work, sort of stuff. And that kind of plays into my next point. In my notes I have titled Kill Your Darlings, which is kind of aggressive, but basically one of the things that I learned while doing this project is sometimes I am not the best critic in regards to saying, okay, this is what I need to cut, this is what I can keep, because ultimately everything that I've compiled, shot-wise, yeah, there was a lot of stuff that we ultimately ended up deciding, okay, we got to get rid of this, even though it's like, oh, there's a great joke in this take or whatever. It was like, ultimately, okay, this scene doesn't need to be in the final cut because it's redundant, for whatever reason, or it doesn't add to the story. So surround yourself with people that can give you that kind of feedback, and also be willing to be open to receiving that kind of feedback, because ultimately a lot of movies suffered from directors and writers not being willing to receive criticism and, I guess, suggestions from fellow people that they're working with. And just surround yourself with people that are willing to be like, hey, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. And one of the really cool things that I'm very thankful for is Jordan was doing our final light and sound pass on the film. And so after he'd done that, he screened the film for his family, which I really liked because I wasn't present for that. And let me explain, because if I was there, I would have probably been like, okay, we need to keep these things. But he was like, okay, I'm going to screen this for my family. And they gave him some really good feedback that he ultimately was like, okay, we're going to do 2 versions of the movie. Here's the one that we settled on in the editing room. And then here's kind of the one taking some of the suggestions from his family and cutting it down even further. So it was like about 20 minutes shorter, but it flowed so much better. And I probably would not have been able to make those sort of calls without seeing the 2 versions next to each other and being like, okay, this one works so much better than this other one. That was one of the things that I was very thankful for on this project. So thank you, Jordan. I think that really helped the project a lot, because we had like a whole sequence at like a rest stop that we had shot like on the way the characters were on their way to the campground and stuff like that. And it ultimately wasn't necessary for furthering the plot, but it was I really liked the scene nonetheless. And so it was ultimately good for me to have stepped back, had somebody else go in and be like, okay, what if this was missing? Take it out, present the 2 versions. Okay, does this work or this work better? And we ultimately went with the one that was 20 minutes shorter, and I think it flows a lot better. Yeah, give yourself a second, third, fourth pair of eyes just to look over your work before you're settled down and like, okay, this is done, because it may very well improve your project significantly. And of course, discernment is needed. Of course, don't take every piece of advice, but be open to the advice that you are given, because depending on who you're working with, not all the advice you receive is going to be the best for your project, because some of it may compromise your vision. I don't know who you're receiving advice from, but it is very good to receive feedback and definitely take it to heart, because it may very well improve your project quite significantly, as I said earlier. Now, that was kind of my third and fourth point molded together, which was like, be willing to kill your darlings, and surround yourself with people that are willing to give your criticism, how to be receptive to that. And then my final point that I learned specifically was film school is not everything. And I know Jordan and Joel Dick did a video on this, but just touching on this briefly, I have spent a couple years in college at community college, and I am currently on a gap term, but planning to transfer to a university to finish my bachelor's in film production. But one of the things that I really was able to grow through this project was getting a lot of that hands-on experience, and part of that's probably due to, you know, the global health crisis that we're going through right now, and stuff like that, not necessarily being able to meet in person for the past year or so. For school, at least at my particular school, there was a lot less hands-on activity, but that was also partially the classes as well. I definitely took a lot more theory-based classes. Some of them were primarily about analyzing movies, stuff like that, and they were wonderful classes. Don't get me wrong. It's just sometimes the, you know, independent film and just getting in front and behind the camera and working with that and other people that share your passion might be better for you. And I definitely think there are pros and cons to both, which is why I'm glad I'm doing both kind of simultaneously, because that hands-on experience was very important to me, and I definitely learned a lot doing this project. I've just touched the surface in this video. My last words of advice for people that have not necessarily jumped on their first project, or maybe they've made a couple small projects but they're wanting to go for a bigger project or something like that, I don't know, I would just say find what works with the things that you have right now. Surround yourself with people that are good to work with, that share your passion, recognize your vision, stuff like that. Don't be afraid to let other people criticize your work, as well as be critical of your work yourself. Of course, don't beat yourself up or anything. I hope some of this was helpful to some of you who might be starting off or may be new to independent or low budget, no budget filmmaking, folk filmmaking. I don't know if Ethan and Jordan are going to do a thing, so like and subscribe to Doomed Productions. I know Ethan and Jordan would really appreciate it. Go watch Wild Boys The Hunt for Sasquatch. It is available now for free on this YouTube channel, so go check that out. We had an absolute blast making the film. There may be a sequel coming at some point. Thank you all for watching, and I don't know when I'll see you next, but yeah. Take care, everybody.